And the boy's refusal to talk with him practically shouts, "Where is God?" To the pastor's surprise, the little boy jumps up out of his chair, runs all the way home, up the stairs, into his brother's room, closes the door and pants. We are in big trouble. God is missing, and they think we had something to do with it. There's a great verse in Luke, the 2nd chapter, and 44th verse says this: "Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day." I love that verse. Thinking they were in their company. See, what happened was, is Jesus and his family had gone down to Jerusalem to take care of some affairs, and they had a big caravan of them, and then they all left with Jerusalem. You know how the story goes. And Jesus' parents said, Joseph said, "Well, I thought you had him." And Mary said, "No, I thought he was with you." And so they had to go all the way back to Jerusalem, a day's journey, to find Jesus. And I'm afraid that still today, we have to ask the question, is Jesus with us? We think that he is in our company, but is he? Carl Medeiros asked the question, we've traveled for 2,000 years. Have we ever asked the question, is Jesus in our company? We're going to start this series beginning in John. We're going to rediscover Jesus, finding the Jesus that John knew. John was an apostle. John was an eyewitness to Jesus. He was there with Jesus. We talk about the 12 apostles, but there were more than just the 12 apostles. But John was an apostle. He was an eyewitness. He was a close friend of Jesus. And John wrote 3 epistles, and he wrote the book of Revelation, and he also wrote a gospel called the book of John. So we have the book of John, we have the epistles by John, which is called 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and we also have the book of Revelation. So we're going to be going through some of these today, and we're going to be going through some of the life of John, but ultimately we're going to go through the entire book of John and discover who Jesus really is. Not who we've made him out to be, but who Jesus really is. So we're going to go to the Epistle of John, all the way back towards the end of the Bible, all the way back towards the book of Revelation. We're going to find the Epistle of 1 John. So if you're going to find this, it's going to be towards the back of your Bible, and the very first chapter of the Epistle of John, we're going to find these things. It says this, and I'm going to be reading out of the New Living Translation of the Bible, and this is what it says. It says, "We proclaim to you the one who existed from the beginning." That's very powerful. "Whom we have heard and seen." This is his own testimony. "We saw him with our own eyes, and we touched him with our own hands. He is the Word of life." This is John describing Jesus, the one he touched, the one he saw. He says this, verse 2, "This one is life itself, was revealed to us, and we have seen him, and now we testify and proclaim to you that he is the one who is eternal life." John says we. He talks about not just himself, but he talks about we. When Jesus was on the earth, he was very, very publicly seen. He was very publicly known. He didn't hide himself. He went right out with people. He was with us. That's what Emmanuel means. God with us. And Jesus was very much with us. So the apostles saw him and they witnessed him and they saw the things that he did, and it had a huge impact on their lives. It says, "And now we testify and proclaim to you that he is the one who is eternal life. He was with the Father, and then he was revealed to us. We proclaim to you what we ourselves have seen and heard," and here's that word we talked about last week, "so that we may have fellowship," so you may have fellowship with us, and our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. So powerful was the impact of Jesus Christ on the life of his followers that they were willing to die horrible deaths and a testimony of what Jesus did and who He really was. So powerful was their life that these men, when they were told by Jesus to go out and to teach and to baptize, they did exactly that. And it cost every one of them, with the exception of John, their lives. Listen to what happened to these 12 men. Peter was crucified upside down in Rome. Andrew was severely scourged, tied with ropes onto an X-shaped cross for 2 days, where he died. This happened in Greece. James was beheaded in Jerusalem. John was thrown in boiling oil, but he survived unharmed. Philip was crucified in Syria. Bartholomew was beaten, flayed, and crucified upside down in India. Thomas was stabbed and burned in an oven in Greece. Matthew was axed to death in Ethiopia. James the Less was thrown down from the temple tower. He did not die, and then he was clubbed to death in Jerusalem. Thaddeus was crucified in Greece. Simon the Zealot was crucified in Europe, and Matthias was stoned and beheaded in Jerusalem. Would these men die these deaths for a lie? Would these men die these deaths for something that was make-believe? Would these men die these deaths for something that never happened? I don't think so. Jesus had a huge impact on every life He touched, and many, many died horrible deaths because they would not relent on what Jesus had done for them. So let's move on. Let's go to the book of John. Now we're going to go backwards to the apostles, to the book of John, that we find where John wrote about the life of Jesus. And as you're heading over there to the book of John, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Here we see a painting by Thomas Kincaid. What does this painting tell about Thomas Kincaid? About how he uses colors? What does it say about him? How he paints and what's inside of his mind? What do these paintings show about the artist, Thomas Kincaid? Or when you see a cartoonist like Watterson, who makes Calvin and Hobbes one of the funniest cartoons ever. Love Calvin and Hobbes. What does it say about him? What does it say about his outlook on life? What does it say about his worldview? What does it say about his politics? When you see a mathematical equation like this, now to me it might as well be Greek or Chinese or whatever, because I have no idea what this is. But to a mathematician, it means something. What does it say about the mathematician's mind when he can unravel something like this and make something out of it? What does it say about Jesus, the Creator who creates all things? Let's go to the book of John, the first chapter, and the very first verse. Now, I had about 58 people last week say, Randy, please, can you just not run all over everywhere? Can you kind of stay in one place? So we're going to do that. We're going to stay in one place. So we're going to go to the book of John, and we're going to park in the book of John. So once you get to the book of John, we're going to stay there. Now it says John chapter 1, the very first verse, it says this. In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. In the beginning, God is probably what I think is the most important verse in the Bible. In the beginning, God. Because that tells us the beginning. In the beginning, God. Everything that happened after that is part of the story. In the beginning, God. Now, one thing that happens with the Bible is not a science manual. The Bible is not to tell us exactly how God did everything. Because if it was a science manual, who would be able to describe how God makes a molecule? Who's going to be able to understand how God makes an atom? Who's going to be able to understand how God makes a cell? Moses wrote most of the book of Genesis. How is Moses going to understand molecular biology? He didn't even have a telescope or anything. So how is God going to relate that? He just said, in the beginning, and I made everything. In the beginning, God is the beginning of everything. And it says here that in the beginning, the Word already existed. He's talking about Jesus. And those who say that Jesus was created, Jesus was not created. Jesus is God. That makes Him uncreated. If Jesus was created, we cannot have salvation. We cannot have what we have in Jesus Christ if He was created. He is not an archangel. He is God Himself. Because in that very next line it says, The Word was with God, and the Word what? Was God. So Christ came down in the form of flesh, but He is absolutely God. And now it says in verse 2, He existed in the beginning with God. Verse 3, God created everything through who? Jesus. Him. Who is the Him He's talking about? The Him is Jesus. Jesus made everything that we see. He made the stars. He made the galaxies. He made everything. So, what does that say about Jesus? What does mountains, what do the mountains say about Jesus? When you see the majesty of a mountain and you see how high it can reach up into the heavens, what does that say about Jesus? What does it say about a creator who creates vast oceans that when we look at them we say, wow, that's where I want to be? What does it say about a creator who creates the venom of a deadly cobra, or the fierceness of a lion, or the majesty of an orca, or the immense size of a blue whale? What does all those things say about Jesus? What does it say about Jesus who creates creatures from the deep who look like something from a sci-fi movie? Or what does it say about Jesus when you look at all the creativity that's around us and all the plants and the animals? What does it say? In the book of Genesis, that it says that the earth was teeming with life. What does that say about Jesus? What does it say about Jesus when He creates otters as playful as they are, or something as playful and cute as puppies? What does it say about Jesus when He makes kids so cute that you can't resist them, and so playful and so fun? What do all of these things say about Jesus? What does someone like the mind of a Da Vinci say about Jesus when you have someone who can create a Mona Lisa? Or what does it say about Jesus who can form someone like Michelangelo with the great artistry that he is, or Picasso? Okay, well maybe not Picasso. I have never gotten Picasso. Sorry. Or the brilliance of an Einstein. What does it say about Jesus who creates all of these things? It says this: Jesus is life. Let's go back to John, the first chapter, and let's look at verses 4 and 5. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and His life brought light to everyone. Jesus is life. And without Jesus, we have no life. Everything that is life is from Jesus. And Jesus came to give us life to the fullest. John the 10th chapter tells us that the evil one comes to steal and to kill and destroy. Do you think that cancer comes from Jesus? Do you think that muscular dystrophy comes from Jesus? I don't think so. I think they come from the evil one, because those things are here to kill and to steal and to destroy. Jesus is life. Let's go to the book of John now. Let's move on over to the 5th chapter. And we're going to start seeing examples of Jesus being life. And I have 8 examples, and we're not even going to get through one because we only have a few minutes left. But we're going to go as far as we can into this story in the book of John, the 5th chapter, beginning with the very first verse. It says this: Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the feasts of the holy days. Where was He before this? He was 60 miles away in Cana. He was just up there turning water into wine and healing a governor's child. So now he has journeyed 60 miles, roughly, and come down to Jerusalem. And by the way, he didn't ride a train, he walked. Jesus walked everywhere that he went. So he walked the 60 miles, and he comes down to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Verse 2. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was a pool of Bethesda, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, and paralyzed, lay on the porches. And then you'll notice here that there is no 4th verse. It jumps. That's because some of the manuscripts do not have the 4th verse. But here's what the 4th verse says. It says, waiting for a certain movement. So go back to verse 3. So they're waiting by the porches. They're waiting for a certain movement of the water. Verse 4, for an angel of the Lord came from time to time and stirred up the water. And the first person to step in the water, after it was stirred, was healed of whatever disease he had. So now we come to verse 5. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. There was a man who was laying beside a pool. And for 38 years he had been sick. And he's about to encounter Jesus. For 38 years, this man had lost his livelihood. For 38 years, this man had lost his friends. For 38 years, he was waiting to try and get into this water. For 38 years, he was destitute. For 38 years, he was homeless. For 38 years, he was longing to be healed. And he had no one to help him into the water when the water was stirred. Here comes Jesus. Verse 6. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked the man, would you like to get well? Now that's just not, no, Jesus, I want to sit here for another 38 years. It was an honest question. Because Jesus is very unassuming. He doesn't assume that you want to be healed. There are people who don't want to be healed, right? There are people who love being miserable. And they really don't want to be healed. And if you ask them about what was going on, they would love to tell you about all the things going on with them. When I went to see Bill on Thursday, walked into the room, I said, Bill, what are you doing here? He says, I got too many things to count. I said, well, tell me some of them. So he said about this, he talked about that, and that's all he would talk about, just a couple of them. Bill knew what was going to happen to him, but he didn't complain. He didn't worry about it. There are some people who are not that way. Some people love to tell you about the time they went to the hospital. And incidentally, you know that a hospital gown is kind of like an insurance policy? You think you're covered, but you're not. So here was this guy laying beside the pool, and his life was ruined. And he's just longing for someone to be his friend who can help him into the pool. And so Jesus comes up beside him, and Jesus doesn't just kind of walk up and say, dost thou want to be healed, young man? No, Jesus, if I know Jesus, he came over to the guy, he sat down with him, and he said, hey, pretty rough, huh? Oh, man, horrible. Would you like to be healed? Oh, man, sir, I'd love to be healed, but I have no one to put me in the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone always gets there ahead of me. Can you just see the ache in this guy's voice? How desperately he wants to be healed. Because for 38 years he's been in this horrible place. For 38 years he's not been able to socialize. He's not been able to walk to the store. He's not been able to walk to a friend's house. He's not been able to do anything. He's been stuck by this pool waiting for someone to get him in the water. And you just feel the pain in his voice. Sir, I have no one to help me into the pool. You see, this guy's idea was the only way he's going to be healed is if he gets in the water first. He didn't know that Jesus was going to come by that day and turn his life upside down. He didn't know that he was going to encounter Jesus. There are so many Christians, so many people who are so close to Jesus. They're this close to Jesus. They've lived their whole life being this close to Jesus, and they don't realize that their life can be turned upside down. The life is found in Jesus. We have so many Christians who are just existing, and so many Christians who don't know that the fullness of Jesus is right there. They don't ask. They don't encounter the living God. So Jesus says to him, he says, pick up your mat and walk. Now I can just see this guy as he's laying there beside the pool, and the stranger comes up and he says, would you like to be healed? The guy says, well, I can't get in the water. And Jesus says, pick up the mat and be healed. And walk. I can just see the expression of the guy's face begin to change as he feels strength returning to his legs. 38 years he has laid by a pool, and Jesus comes up, and the way that Jesus does, touches the guy. Get up and walk. Because Jesus is life. And whatever's going on in your life right now, please understand that Jesus brings life. He brings life into your heart. He brings life into your soul. He brings life into your relationships. He brings life into your marriages. He brings life into your job. He brings life into your soul. Because that's what Jesus does. Jesus doesn't take. Jesus gives. And he comes to this man who has been who's been so sick for so long. He doesn't even know. He doesn't even remember how to walk. He doesn't even remember what it was like to stand. And Jesus comes up and says, pick up your mat and walk. And he feels his strength returning to his feet. And he picks up his mat and he rolls it up and he's jumping around. You think the guy says, thine has healed me. And begins to walk away. Look at me, I can walk. I haven't walked for 38 years, but boy, no way, man. I guarantee you, he was jumping around and he was excited. He was whooping up, woo, look at me, running around and jumping up and down and throwing his mat up in the air and catching it, having a great old time. Until what happens? Uh-oh, we got trouble. This miracle happened when? On the Sabbath. That's trouble. Why? Because some of the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, you can't work on the Sabbath. This guy was laying by a pool for 38 years, and the religious folks said, you can't carry your mat. The party poopers. And that's what happens sometimes with religious people. We get caught up in the stuff that looks like Jesus, but it's really not Jesus. Let me give you a little background here. For 400 years, we have a period of time called period of silence, or 400 years of silence. And if you go to the Old Testament, there's a book called Malachi, and it's the very last book of the book of the Old Testament. And between the time that Malachi was written and the time that Jesus appears on the earth is roughly 400 years. And nothing is happening there. There's no prophets. There's no miracles. There's no revelations. Nothing. God is quiet. For 400 years, nothing. Alexander the Great has come and gone. The Roman Empire is beginning its surge. During this time, we have also the Maccabean period. There's a lot of things going on this time, but as far as God's concerned, silence. For 400 years, nothing going on. And a miracle appears in Jerusalem for the first time in 400 years. And what are the religious concerned about? That this guy was picking up his mat and walking. Instead of saying, wait a minute, whoa, what were you talking about? Aren't you the guy by the... You mean you were healed? Who? Oh, God's here! Woo! God is here! 400 years we've been waiting for this, and He's finally here! No. They're worried about this guy picking up his mat. Because that is what clouds what we call the religious fog. Clouds who Jesus really was. Standing right in front of these religious people was Jesus Christ, and they didn't recognize Him. God in the flesh. I love the scandal of the story. Jesus goes right up to religious people, and He begins to challenge their belief system. God didn't say don't pick up your mat. People did. God didn't institute the law, you can't pick up your mat on the Sabbath. They did. Jesus said, or the Old Testament, He said, you're supposed to rest on the Sabbath. But that wasn't good enough for them to rest. They had to start putting all the things that you could not do on the Sabbath day. And by the time the 400 years of silence comes to an end, that list got really, really long. And one of those things you couldn't do was pick up your mat. And Jesus comes right up to him, and He finds compassion for this young man, and He says, your life is more important than some stupid law that I did not put in place. And he healed that man. Because that's who Jesus is. I love the scandal. I love the fact that Jesus chose to come to earth to a virgin. I love that. Who's going to believe that? Right from the very beginning there's scandal about Jesus. Right from the very beginning. Here was a guy who says, the Messiah. Well, who's your mom and dad? Well, my dad, he's my heavenly father, and my mom is married. Can you imagine the talk around everybody else? You came from, now wait a minute, what was that again? Your dad's really not Joseph? Nobody's going to believe that. I love that scandal. Jesus turns the water into wine. I love that scandal. We tried to make it grape juice. It wasn't grape juice. It was wine. It's what Jesus did. And sometimes we try to manipulate the story a little bit. Jesus didn't do that. He just went right into the truth because Jesus is truth. And Jesus is life. We've got to finish up because our time is up. Well, let's go to the end of the story. Afterwards, they found him in the temple, and Jesus came and he found the guy in the temple. And he says this, something very curious. He says, now you are well, stop sinning, or something even worse may happen to you. Now that kind of puzzles me. Why would Jesus say to this guy, stop sinning? I mean, he's been by the pool for 38 years. He hasn't been able to get himself into much mischief. What could he possibly be doing that Jesus would say to him, stop sinning? I found the answer in the book of John, the 16th chapter. And it says this, verse 8. And when he comes, he's talking about the Holy Spirit. And this is Jesus' own words himself. He says, and when he comes, he will convict the world of its sin and of God's righteousness and of the coming judgment. And here's the sin that Jesus was talking about. The world's sin is that it refuses to believe in me. What Jesus was telling the young man was this.